Una donna aiuta un lupo intrappolato e dopo 9 anni il lupo la ritrova e accade un fatto incredibile. Of a small town in rural Tennessee, where weathered farmhouses blended with lush vegetation, lived Hannah Johnson, a 13-year-old girl with honey-colored eyes and a smile that could brighten even the gloomiest day. Her home, a modest 2-room cabin, stood at the boundary between civilization and the dense forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. Hannah grew up in a neighborhood where poverty was as common as the sun that shone on their tin roofs. Her mother, Sarah, worked tirelessly as a seamstress in the town's workshop, her hands always busy mending and creating to put food on the table. Despite her efforts, scarcity was a constant shadow looming over the small family. One spring morning, as the scent of wildflowers wafted through the air, Hannah woke up with a determination that shone in her eyes. She had spent the night listening to her mother's stomach growl, refusing to eat so her daughter could have an extra bite. That silent sacrifice had touched Hannah's heart, inspiring her to find a way to help. "Mom," Hannah said as Sarah prepared to leave for work, "I'm going to explore the woods today. Maybe I'll find some fruits or herbs we can use." Sarah looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Be careful, sweetheart. The forest can be dangerous for a young girl like you." Hannah nodded, hugging her mother before watching her leave. Once alone, she grabbed a small basket and ventured into the forest, her bare feet treading softly on the damp earth. The rustle of leaves and birdsong enveloped her as she advanced, her eyes alert for any treasure nature might offer. After hours of searching, her basket remained empty. Frustrated but not discouraged, Hannah decided to venture a little deeper into the woods. That's when she heard it, a low, pitiful whimper echoing among the trees. Intrigued and a little scared, she followed the sound to a small clearing. There, caught in a cruel animal trap, lay a young wolf. Its grey fur was stained with blood, and its amber eyes gleamed with a mixture of ferocity and fear. Hannah felt her heart skip a beat. She had never seen a wolf so close, and the sight filled her with equal parts terror and fascination. The wolf growled weakly when it saw her, baring its sharp teeth in a silent warning. But Hannah didn't see a fierce beast. She saw a living being in pain, in need of help. Cautiously, she took a step closer. "Easy," she whispered, extending a trembling hand. "I'm not going to hurt you. I want to help." The wolf watched her, its eyes fixed on her with an intensity that seemed to pierce her soul. Slowly, as if understanding her words, the animal stopped growling and remained still, allowing Hannah to approach. With shaking but determined hands, Hannah examined the trap. It was a simple but cruel mechanism, designed to catch and hold. Taking a deep breath to calm her nerves, she began working to free the wolf. Her fingers, accustomed to helping her mother with sewing, proved to be agile and precise as she manipulated the mechanism. After several tense minutes, during which Hannah feared the wolf might attack her at any moment, the trap finally opened. The wolf, however, didn't move immediately. Its paw was badly injured and the animal seemed too weak to stand. Hannah looked around, searching for something that might help. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell her about the healing properties of certain forest plants. With renewed determination, she began collecting leaves and flowers she recognized from those stories. Crushing the plants between 2 stones to form a paste, Hannah approached the wolf again. "This might sting a bit," she murmured, more to calm herself than the animal. Gently, she applied the mixture to the wolf's wound, which let out a small whimper, but made no move to stop her. As she worked, Hannah couldn't help but notice the beauty of the animal. Its fur, though stained with blood, was soft and thick. Its eyes, which now looked at her with what seemed to be a mixture of curiosity and gratitude, were a deep amber that shone with intelligence. "You're going to be okay," Hannah assured the wolf, finishing bandaging its paw with strips she had torn from her own skirt. "I'll come back tomorrow to see how you're doing and bring you something to eat." As she stood up, Hannah realized that the sun was already low on the horizon. She had spent hours in the forest, and her mother would be worried. With one last look at the wolf, which now rested more peacefully, Hannah hurried back home. That night, as she lay in her bed listening to the sounds of the forest through the open window, Hannah couldn't stop thinking about the wolf. There was something in its eyes, a connection she had felt the moment their gazes met. It was as if fate had intertwined their paths for some reason she couldn't yet understand. As sleep overtook her, Hannah made a silent promise. She would care for that wolf, help it recover, no matter what it cost. She didn't know why, but she felt that this encounter was the beginning of something important, something that would change her life forever. The hooting of an owl in the distance seemed to seal her promise, and Hannah fell asleep with a smile on her lips, dreaming of amber eyes and a forest full of mysteries yet to be discovered. Dawn was breaking over the small Tennessee town, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Hannah woke with the first crow of the rooster, her mind immediately filled with thoughts of the injured wolf she had left in the forest. She dressed hurriedly, grabbing a piece of stale bread from the kitchen before quietly slipping out of the house. The morning dew dampened the grass beneath her bare feet as she headed towards the woods. The fresh air filled her lungs, bringing with it the scent of pine and damp earth. With each step she took, Hannah felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety growing in her chest. Would the wolf still be there? Had it survived the night? When she reached the clearing where she had found the injured animal, Hannah held her breath. There, in the same spot where she had left it, lay the wolf. Hearing her footsteps, the animal raised its head, its amber eyes fixed on her with a gaze that seemed to recognize her. "Good morning," Hannah whispered, approaching slowly. "I'm glad you're still here." The wolf made no move to retreat, allowing the young girl to come closer. Hannah knelt beside it, carefully examining the wound on its paw. To her relief, the swelling seemed to have decreased and there were no signs of infection. "Look, I brought you something to eat," she said, pulling the bread from her pocket. She broke it into small pieces and offered them to the wolf, which sniffed them cautiously before eating slowly. As the wolf ate, Hannah took the opportunity to gather more herbs. This time, she prepared a more elaborate ointment, mixing the plants with water from a nearby stream. Gently, she cleaned and rebandaged the wolf's wound. "I'm going to call you Shadow," Hannah decided as she worked, "because of the color of your fur, which shines like a shadow in the moonlight." The wolf, as if understanding, raised its gaze to her. For a moment, Hannah felt she could see directly into the animal's soul, a deep and inexplicable connection that filled her with a comforting warmth. The following days became a routine for Hannah. Each morning, before her mother woke up, she would sneak into the forest to care for Shadow. She brought with her the food scraps she could save without her mother noticing, feeling guilty about the secret, but determined to help her new friend. Shadow improved day by day. Soon he was able to stand, though he limped when walking. Hannah spent hours sitting next to the wolf, talking to him about her life, her dreams, and her worries. Shadow listened with an attention that seemed almost human, his amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel understood, like never before. "You know, Shadow," Hannah said one afternoon, as the sun began to descend between the trees, "sometimes I feel like you're the only one who really understands me. At home, Mum is always so tired and worried, and at school the other kids make fun of me for being poor. But here, with you, I can be myself." Shadow responded by resting his head on Hannah's lap, a gesture that filled her with emotion. Unable to contain herself, the young girl buried her fingers in the wolf's soft fur, marveling at the trust the wild animal placed in her. As days turned into weeks, Hannah noticed changes in herself. She felt stronger, more confident. The time she spent in the forest with Shadow had taught her about resilience and courage. She learned to move silently among the trees, to recognize the sounds and smells of the forest, to feel part of something bigger than herself. However, with Shadow's improvement, Hannah knew that the time for goodbye was approaching. The wolf could now walk without difficulty, and his wild nature was beginning to manifest more clearly. Sometimes Shadow would disappear for hours, returning with tangled fur and the scent of adventure. One morning, Hannah arrived at the clearing to find Shadow standing, looking towards the depths of the forest. The young girl's heart sank, knowing what this meant. "It's time, isn't it?" she whispered, approaching the wolf. Shadow turned to her, his eyes full of an emotion that Hannah couldn't describe but understood perfectly. With tears in her eyes, Hannah hugged Shadow for the last time. "Thank you," she murmured against the wolf's fur. "Thank you for being my friend, for teaching me so much. I'll never forget you." Shadow gently licked Hannah's cheek, a farewell gesture that made the young girl's heart fill with a bittersweet mixture of joy and sadness. Then, with one last look, the wolf turned and headed into the forest, his grey figure fading among the trees until he disappeared completely. Hannah stayed there for a long time, looking at the spot where Shadow had disappeared. Although her heart ached at her friend's departure, she also felt a strange sense of fulfillment. She knew that this experience had changed her forever. As she walked back home, Hannah carried with her not only the memories of her time with Shadow, but also a new strength and determination. The forest, which had once seemed mysterious and threatening, now felt like a second home. Someday, she promised herself, I'll see you again, Shadow. And when I do, I'll be stronger and braver than I am now. With that promise in her heart, Hannah returned to her life in the town. But now, every time she looked towards the forest, she felt a special connection, an invisible bond that linked her to Shadow and the secrets that the forest held. She knew her adventure hadn't ended. In fact, she felt it was just beginning. Time passed inexorably in the small Tennessee town. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Hannah, the girl who had once rescued an injured wolf in the forest, transformed into a young woman of 22, with the same sparkle in her honey-colored eyes, but with a maturity and determination that only years and experiences can bestow. Although 9 years had passed since her encounter with Shadow, Hannah never forgot those days in the forest. The lesson of courage and compassion she had learned became the pillar of her character, guiding each of her decisions and actions. Life hadn't been easy for Hannah and her mother, Sarah. Poverty remained a constant companion, but both had found ways to get by. Sarah continued working in the sewing workshop, her hands now more wrinkled but equally skilled. Hannah, for her part, had gotten a job as an assistant at the small town clinic, where her knowledge of medicinal herbs, acquired during her days caring for Shadow, proved invaluable. One spring morning, as Hannah walked to the clinic, she paused for a moment to look towards the forest. As always, she felt that special connection, that silent call that had never abandoned her. She smiled to herself, remembering the promise she had made years ago. "Someday, Shadow," she whispered to the wind. "Someday we'll meet again." Upon arriving at the clinic, Hannah encountered an unusual scene. A young man, his hands stained with grease and a pained expression on his face, was sitting in the waiting room. "Good morning," Hannah greeted, approaching him. "How can I help you?" The young man looked up, and for a moment, Hannah felt the world stop. His eyes were a warm brown, full of a kindness that instantly captivated her. "My name's Ethan," he responded with a shy smile. "I work at the auto shop on the other side of town. I hurt my hand with a tool," and Hannah didn't need any more explanations. Gently, she took Ethan's hand and examined it. The cut wasn't deep, but it would need attention. "Don't worry," she assured him. "I'll have you patched up in no time." As she cleaned and bandaged Ethan's wound, Hannah couldn't help but feel an immediate connection with him. They chatted animatedly, discovering they had much in common. Both had grown up in the town, facing difficulties but maintaining hope for a better future. From that day on, Ethan became a constant presence in Hannah's life. They would accidentally run into each other at the market, share walks through the town square, and slowly a tender and sincere love began to blossom between them. Months after their first encounter, Ethan took Hannah on a small picnic on the outskirts of town, near the forest that meant so much to her. Under the shade of a large oak tree, Ethan took Hannah's hands in his. "Hannah," he said, his voice trembling slightly with nerves, "these months with you have been the happiest of my life. I know I don't have much to offer you, but I promise to love and care for you always. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Hannah's eyes as she nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Ethan." "Of course, yes." The kiss they shared sealed their promise of love, while the forest seemed to whisper its approval in the soft movement of the leaves. The wedding was a simple but joyous celebration. The whole town came together to celebrate Hannah and Ethan's union. Sarah, with tears of happiness in her eyes, hugged her daughter and new son-in-law, grateful to see Hannah so happy. The first months of marriage were a dream for the young couple. Although they lived in a small and modest house, they filled it with love and hope. Hannah continued working at the clinic, while Ethan worked hard at the auto shop, dreaming of being able to open his own business someday. However, life is rarely an easy path, and soon they faced their first big challenge. One morning, Hannah woke up feeling dizzy and nauseous. At first, she attributed it to something she had eaten, but when the symptoms persisted for days, a suspicion began to grow in her mind. With a mixture of excitement and nervousness, Hannah took a test at the clinic. When the positive result confirmed her suspicions, she felt her heart fill with indescribable joy. That night, when Ethan returned from work, Hannah greeted him with a radiant smile. "Ethan," she said, taking her husband's hands, "I have something wonderful to tell you. We're going to be parents." Ethan's expression went from surprise to euphoria in a matter of seconds. He lifted Hannah in his arms, spinning with her amidst laughter and tears of happiness. "Her baby," Ethan exclaimed, kissing Hannah tenderly. "Our baby. Oh, Hannah, you've made me the happiest man in the world." That night, lying in their bed, Hannah and Ethan talked for hours about their dreams and plans for the future. They imagined what their son or daughter would be like, discussed names, and promised each other to do everything possible to give their baby a life full of love and opportunities. While Ethan slept, Hannah quietly got up and approached the window. She looked towards the forest, which stretched in the distance under the moonlight. Instinctively, she placed a hand on her belly where new life was growing. "Shadow," she whispered to the night wind, "I wish you could see who I've become. I wish you could meet the family I'm building. Thank you for the lesson you taught me so many years ago. I promise to pass on that same love and compassion to my child." With that silent promise, Hannah returned to bed, cuddling up next to Ethan. As she fell asleep, she felt a deep peace, as if the universe was assuring her that, despite the challenges that might come, everything would be all right. The months passed quickly for Hannah and Ethan. Hannah's belly grew day by day, as did the young couple's excitement and anticipation. Despite the economic difficulties they faced, both worked hard to prepare as best they could for their baby's arrival. Hannah continued working at the clinic, though now with reduced hours on the doctor's recommendation. Her knowledge of medicinal herbs had become even more valuable, as many in the town preferred her natural remedies to the expensive medicines that came from the city. Ethan, for his part, worked long hours at the auto shop, determined to save every dollar he could for his family's future. However, conditions at the shop were becoming increasingly difficult. The owner, Mr. Johnson, was known for his volatile temper and harsh treatment of employees. One evening, as Hannah was preparing dinner, Ethan arrived home with a gloomy expression on his face. "What's wrong, honey?" Hannah asked, concerned at seeing the distress in her husband's eyes. Ethan sat heavily in a chair, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "It's Mr. Johnson," he finally said. "Today he threatened to fire several of us if we don't increase production. But we're already working at maximum capacity, Hannah. I don't know how we can do more." Hannah approached Ethan, embracing him tenderly. "I know, my love. You've been working so hard. But we'll find a solution, you'll see." Despite her words of encouragement, Hannah couldn't help but feel a pang of worry. With the baby on the way, they couldn't afford to lose Ethan's income. The following days were tense. Ethan came home each night more tired and stressed. Hannah did everything she could to cheer him up, but she could see how the pressure was affecting her husband. One night, as they were having dinner, Ethan dropped his fork with a sigh of frustration. "I can't go on like this, Hannah. Mr. Johnson keeps demanding more and more. Today he even hinted that we should work Sundays without extra pay." Hannah took Ethan's hand in hers. "That's not fair, Ethan. You have to do something. Talk to him." "We tried," Ethan replied, defeat clear in his voice. "But Mr. Johnson threatened to replace us all if we keep complaining. He says there are many who would be willing to take our places." Hannah felt anger growing inside her. How could someone treat their workers like this? She remembered the lessons of courage she had learned years ago with Shadow. "You can't let him treat you like this," she said firmly. "You have to stand united, show Mr. Johnson that he can't abuse you." Ethan looked at Hannah with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're right, my love, but I'm scared. If we lose these jobs, we'll find a way," Hannah assured, caressing her belly. "For our baby, for our future. We can't live in fear." Inspired by Hannah's strength, Ethan decided to talk to his co-workers. In secret, they began to organize a peaceful protest, determined to demand fair conditions and dignified treatment. The day of the protest arrived. Hannah, despite her advanced pregnancy, insisted on accompanying Ethan. "We're in this together," she told him, her voice full of determination. In front of the auto shop, the workers gathered, holding signs that called for justice and respect. Ethan, with Hannah by his side, stepped forward to speak with Mr. Johnson, who had stormed out of his office in fury. "What is the meaning of this?" Mr. Johnson roared, his face red with anger. "You're all fired." "You can't do that," Ethan responded calmly. "We're honest workers who are only asking for fair treatment. If you fire us all, who will do the work?" Mr. Johnson looked around, Noticing that several customers and town residents had stopped to observe the scene, his expression changed from anger to concern as he realized he was losing control of the situation. At that moment, Hannah stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson," she said in a clear and firm voice, "these men are the heart of your business. Without them, you'd have nothing. Don't you think they deserve to be treated with dignity?" Hannah's words seemed to have an effect on Mr. Johnson. For a moment, the man appeared to hesitate, looking at the workers and then at the crowd that had formed. Just when it seemed the situation might resolve peacefully, Hannah felt a sharp pain in her belly. She gasped, clutching her stomach. "Hannah!" Ethan exclaimed, holding her. "What's wrong?" "The baby," Hannah whispered, pain evident in her voice. "I think it's coming." The tension in the atmosphere instantly changed. The workers, even Mr. Johnson, momentarily forgot their differences in the face of the urgency of the situation. "Quick," someone shouted, "we need to get her to the clinic." Ethan lifted Hannah in his arms, fear and concern clear on his face. "Mr. Ree." Johnson, in an unexpected gesture, approached them. "Use my car," he said, handing the keys to Ethan. "It's faster than walking." As Ethan placed Hannah in the back seat of the car, she looked towards the distant forest. Amidst the pain and anxiety, a thought crossed her mind. "Shadow, give me strength. I need it now more than ever." The car sped off, leaving behind a group of shocked workers and spectators. The protest had taken an unexpected turn, and no one knew how this story would end. The only certain thing was that Hannah and Ethan's life was about to change forever. As the vehicle sped towards the clinic, Hannah closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She clung to Ethan's hand, feeling they were on the edge of something big, something that would test everything they had learned and everything they were. The future was uncertain, but together, they were ready to face it. Mr. Johnson's car weaved through the town streets at full speed, with Ethan at the wheel, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. In the back seat, Hannah gasped, the pain of contractions intensifying with each passing minute. "Hold on, my love," Ethan murmured, dividing his attention between the road and his wife. "We're almost at the clinic." Hannah nodded weakly, closing her eyes and focusing on her breathing. In her mind, she evoked the image of Shadow, the wolf she had saved years ago. "Give me your strength," she thought, remembering the resilience and courage of the injured animal. Finally, they arrived at the small town clinic. Ethan braked abruptly and shot out of the car, shouting for help as he opened the back door to get Hannah out. Dr. Wilson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and steady hands, quickly came out upon hearing the shouts. "Hurry," she ordered, helping Ethan carry Hannah inside. "Take her to the delivery room." The next moments were a whirlwind of activity. Hannah was placed on a bed, while Dr. Wilson and the nurses moved efficiently around her, preparing everything necessary for the delivery. "Ethan," Hannah gasped, clinging to her husband's hand. "I'm scared." Ethan kissed her sweaty forehead, his eyes full of love and concern. "I'm here, my life. You're the strongest woman I know. You can do this." The hours passed slowly, each contraction more intense than the last. Hannah screamed, cried, and in the moments of respite between contractions, whispered Shadow's name like a mantra, seeking comfort in the memory of her old friend. Outside the clinic, a crowd had gathered. The auto shop workers, neighbors, and even Mr. Johnson anxiously waited for news. The tension from the protest had dissipated, replaced by a collective concern for Hannah and her baby. Inside the delivery room, Dr. Wilson encouraged Hannah. "Almost there, Hannah. One more push." "Push!" With a heart-wrenching scream and one last supreme effort, Hannah gave birth. A baby's cry filled the room, a sound that made Hannah's heart swell with indescribable joy. "It's a girl," Dr. Wilson announced, holding the little one. "A beautiful girl." Ethan, with tears in his eyes, cut the umbilical cord. The nurse cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a blanket before placing her in Hannah's arms. Hannah looked at her daughter for the first time, marveling at the perfection of her tiny face. "Hello, my love," she whispered, her voice broken with emotion. "We've been waiting for you." Ethan leaned in, embracing his wife and daughter. "She's perfect," he said, kissing both their foreheads. "Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for this miracle." As the small family shared this intimate moment, Dr. Wilson went out to inform the waiting crowd. A chorus of cheers and applause erupted when she announced the successful birth of the girl. Mr. Johnson, who had remained silent all this time, approached the doctor. "May I see them?" he asked, his voice unusually soft. The doctor nodded, and Mr. Johnson timidly entered the room. The scene he found deeply moved him. Hannah, exhausted but radiant, holding her baby, with Ethan by her side, both with expressions of pure happiness. "Congratulations," Mr. Johnson said, his voice laden with emotion. I want to apologize for everything. Seeing this, it makes me realize what really matters." Hannah and Ethan exchanged a look of surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," Ethan responded. "And thank you for helping us get here in time." Mr. Johnson nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "Things are going to change at the shop," he promised. "You have my word." As Mr. Johnson left the room, Hannah looked at her daughter and then at Ethan. "What shall we name her?" she asked. Ethan smiled, caressing his daughter's cheek. "How about Shadow?" he suggested. "In honor of your friend from the forest who gave you the strength to get here." Hannah felt tears filling her eyes again. "Shadow," she repeated, trying out the name. "It's perfect." At that moment, as if responding to her name, little Shadow opened her eyes for the first time. Hannah held her breath as she saw that her daughter's eyes were a warm amber, so similar to those of the wolf she had saved years ago. "Welcome to the world, Shadow," Hannah whispered, feeling a deep connection with her daughter, as if somehow the spirit of the wolf lived on in her. The days following Shadow's birth were a whirlwind of visits and congratulations. Sarah, Hannah's mother, couldn't contain her tears every time she held her granddaughter. Ethan's co-workers came in groups, bringing small gifts and well wishes. Mr. Johnson kept his promise. In the weeks following Shadow's birth, he implemented significant changes at the auto shop. Better working conditions, fairer hours, and even a modest pay raise for everyone. The protest that had begun with tension had ended up bringing positive transformation for the entire community. As Hannah recovered and adapted to her new role as a mother, she often found herself looking towards the forest from her bedroom window. With Shadow in her arms, she would tell stories about the brave wolf that had changed her life. "Someday," Hannah promised her daughter, "I'll take you to the forest and teach you all its secrets. I'll teach you to be strong and compassionate, like the Shadow you're named after." Ethan, observing his wife and daughter, felt his heart overflow with love and gratitude. Despite the difficulties they had faced, and those that would surely come in the future, he knew that together they could overcome any obstacle. As the sun set over the small town, bathing the room in a golden light, Hannah, Ethan, and little Shadow formed a picture of peace and hope. It was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one full of infinite promises and possibilities. Years passed quickly for the little family. Shadow grew into a lively and curious girl, with a special connection to nature that reminded Hannah of her own childhood. At 5 years old, Shadow was the spitting image of her mother, with the same amber eyes that seemed to shine with wisdom beyond her years. Hannah had returned to work at the clinic, now with more responsibilities. Her knowledge of medicinal herbs had expanded, and many in the town sought her out for consultations and natural remedies. Ethan, for his part, had become the head mechanic at Mr. Johnson's shop, who had fulfilled his promise to improve working conditions. However, despite the apparent stability, Hannah and Ethan couldn't help but feel that something was missing in their lives. Ethan's dream of having his own shop remained latent, while Hannah yearned to be able to help more people with her knowledge of natural medicine. One afternoon, as the family enjoyed a picnic at the edge of the forest, Shadow came running to her parents, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, Dad," she exclaimed, "I saw a wolf. There among the trees." Hannah and Ethan exchanged looks of surprise and concern. "Are you sure, honey?" Hannah asked, scrutinizing the forest. Shadow nodded vehemently. "Yes, Mom. It was big and grey, like in your stories. It looked at me and then disappeared." Ethan stood up, protective. "Maybe we should go if there are wolves nearby." But Hannah felt a strange calm. "No, wait," she said, taking Shadow's hand. I think it might be a sign." "A sign?" Ethan asked, confused. Hannah nodded, her eyes fixed on the forest. "I've been thinking, Ethan, what if we combined our dreams? Your desire to have your own business and my passion for natural medicine. We could open a natural remedy store with a small auto repair shop attached." Ethan blinked, surprised by the idea. "But, Hannah, how could we do it? We don't have the money to start a business." We can start small, Hannah insisted, excitement growing in her voice. I can prepare remedies at home at first, and you could do repairs on weekends. Over time, we'll save enough to open our own place. Shadow, who had been listening attentively, jumped with excitement. Yes, and I can help gather herbs in the forest. Ethan looked at his wife and daughter, a smile slowly forming on his face. It's crazy, he said, but it could work. We'd have to work very hard. We'll do it together, Hannah replied, squeezing his hand. As a family. That night, after putting Shadow to bed, Hannah and Ethan stayed up late planning their future. They made lists, calculated costs, and dreamed big. Despite the obstacles they knew they would face, they felt full of hope and determination. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Hannah began preparing tinctures, ointments, and teas in her kitchen, using the herbs she collected with Shadow on their walks in the forest. Ethan, meanwhile, started doing small repairs in his spare time, gradually gaining a reputation for his skill and honesty. The town, always united, received the news of Hannah and Ethan's new venture with enthusiasm. Many offered to help. Mr. Johnson lent them some tools. Dr. Wilson recommended Hannah's remedies to her patients, and neighbors spread the word about Ethan's services. However, not everything was easy. There were nights when Hannah and Ethan lay awake, worried about finances and the future. Shadow, perceptive as always, noticed her parents' tension and tried to cheer them up with her stories and drawings of the wolf she had seen. One day, as Hannah and Shadow were collecting herbs in the forest, the girl suddenly stopped, her eyes fixed on a point between the trees. "Mum," she whispered, "it's him again." Hannah looked in the direction her daughter was pointing and felt her heart skip a beat. There, a few meters away, was a grey wolf, majestic and serene. Its eyes, a deep amber, were fixed on them. "Shadow," Hannah murmured, squeezing her daughter's hand, "don't move." But the wolf didn't seem threatening. In fact, there was something in its gaze that seemed familiar to Hannah. Could it be? As if answering her silent question, the wolf slightly inclined its head, in what appeared to be a gesture of recognition. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it turned and headed into the forest. "Mom," Shadow exclaimed, excited. "It greeted us." "Did you see?" Hannah nodded, tears of emotion forming in her eyes. "Yes, my love, I saw." That encounter renewed Hannah's determination. That night, she told Ethan what had happened, and together they decided it was a sign that they were on the right path. With renewed energy, they redoubled their efforts. Hannah experimented with new formulas, creating remedies that soon became famous beyond the town limits. Ethan, for his part, began receiving requests from neighboring towns to repair vehicles that other mechanics couldn't fix. Shadow, growing up in this environment of hard work and big dreams, developed an insatiable curiosity. She spent hours helping her mother classify herbs and her father organize tools. At school, she excelled in natural sciences and mathematics, fascinated by how this knowledge applied to her parents' work. Finally, after 2 years of tireless work, saving, and sacrifice, Hannah and Ethan had enough money to rent a small storefront in the center of town. With the help of friends and neighbors, they renovated it, creating a cozy space for the natural remedy store in the front and a modest auto repair shop in the back. On the day of the grand opening, the entire town gathered to celebrate. Dr. Wilson cut the ribbon, officially declaring the business open. Mr. Johnson, proud of his former employee, was the first to buy a remedy for his arthritis and schedule a service for his car. As Hannah and Ethan greeted the customers and friends who filled their new store, Shadow slipped away to the door. Looking towards the forest visible in the distance, the girl smiled. There, at the edge of the trees, she thought she saw a grey figure watching them. She raised her hand in a small wave, and for a moment, she believed she saw the wolf nod its head before disappearing among the trees. Shadow went back into the store, her heart full of an emotion she couldn't fully explain. Looking at her parents, busy and happy, she knew this was just the beginning of a new adventure for her family. And somewhere in the forest, a silent guardian watched over them, an invisible bond connecting the past with the present and the future. The months following the opening of the store and auto shop were a whirlwind of activity for the family. The business, which they had named Shadow's Remedies and Repairs in honor of both their daughter and the wolf that had inspired their journey, began to flourish. The unique combination of Hannah's natural remedies and Ethan's mechanical skills attracted customers not only from their town, but also from neighboring communities. Shadow, now 8 years old, had become an integral part of the family business. After school, she spent hours in the store, helping to organize herbs, greeting customers with her charming smile, and occasionally accompanying her father to the shop to learn about engines and tools. However, success also brought new challenges. As the reputation of Shadow's remedies and repairs grew, it began to attract the attention of less scrupulous competitors. One morning, Hannah arrived at the store to find the door forced open and the interior trashed. Broken jars, herbs scattered across the floor, and the cash register emptied. Her heart sank at the sight of the chaos. Ethan arrived minutes later, his face pale with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, embracing Hannah. "What happened?" "I don't know," Hannah replied, trying to keep calm. "It was like this when I got here." Shadow, who had insisted on coming with her father, looked at the scene with wide, frightened eyes. "Mom, Dad," she said quietly, "why would someone do this?" Hannah and Ethan exchanged glances, unsure how to explain the cruelty of the world to their daughter. Before they could respond, the local police arrived to investigate. As the officers took statements and gathered evidence, neighbors began to gather outside the store. News of the break-in had spread quickly through the town, and the community, which had always supported Hannah and Ethan, was ready to help. Mr. Johnson was one of the first to offer his support. "Ethan, Hannah," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "whatever you need to get back on your feet, count on me." Dr. Wilson also approached, offering help to replenish medical supplies. Other neighbors volunteered to help clean up and repair the damage. Moved by the community's support, Hannah and Ethan felt renewed in their determination. "Thank you all," Hannah said, tears in her eyes. "With your help, we'll come back stronger than ever." Shadow, observing the scene, felt a mixture of sadness and hope. As her parents talked with neighbors and the police, the girl slipped away to the back of the store, where a small window looked out towards the forest. Looking at the trees, Shadow whispered, "If you're out there, Wolf, please help us. We need your strength now." As if answering her call, a soft wind blew from the forest, bringing with it the scent of pine and damp earth. Shadow felt a calm envelop her, and she knew in her heart that somehow everything would be all right. The following days were challenging. Hannah and Ethan worked tirelessly to repair the damage and replenish lost inventory. Shadow, determined to help, spent her afternoons after school sorting herbs and cleaning jars. A week after the incident, as Hannah was preparing a new batch of remedies, she noticed something strange about one of the herbs Shadow had collected. It was a plant she had never seen before, with deep green leaves and small, bright blue flowers. Intrigued, Hannah began to investigate. She consulted her botany books and called some of her contacts in neighboring towns. Finally, she discovered that the plant was a rare species, known for its powerful healing properties. Excited by the discovery, Hannah began experimenting with the new herb. After weeks of careful testing, she developed a new remedy that proved to be incredibly effective in treating ailments that were previously difficult to manage. The new remedy quickly became a success. Patients from all over the state began arriving at Shadow's Remedies and Repairs in search of the miracle elixir, as it had been dubbed. The renewed success brought with it new challenges. Hannah and Ethan found themselves working long hours to meet demand, often sacrificing family time. Shadow, although proud of her parents' success, began to feel a little neglected. One night, as Hannah and Ethan discussed how to expand the business, Shadow interrupted them. "Mom? Dad?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Can we go to the forest this weekend? Like we used to?" Hannah and Ethan looked at each other, suddenly aware of how much they had been neglecting their daughter. "Of course, sweetie," Hannah said, hugging Shadow. "I'm sorry we've been so busy." "We'll have a picnic," Ethan added, joining the hug, "just like old times." The weekend arrived, and the family ventured into the forest, loaded with a basket of food and hearts full of anticipation. As they walked, Hannah and Ethan realized how much they had missed this. The fresh air, the crunch of leaves under their feet, Shadow's laughter echoing among the trees. They found a sunny clearing and spread out their picnic blanket. As they ate and chatted, sharing stories and laughter, they felt the stress and worries of the past weeks melt away. Suddenly, Shadow stood up, her eyes fixed on something beyond the trees. "Look," she whispered excitedly. Hannah and Ethan followed her gaze and held their breath. There, at the edge of the clearing, was the wolf. Its grey fur shone in the sunlight, and its amber eyes watched them with an intensity that seemed to pierce their souls. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The wolf looked at them one by one as if evaluating them. Then, slowly, it inclined its head in what appeared to be a gesture of approval. Before they could react, the wolf turned and disappeared into the trees as silently as it had arrived. Shadow was the first to break the silence. "Did you see?" she exclaimed. "It was him. The wolf from your stories, Mom." Hannah nodded, tears of emotion in her eyes. "Yes, my love. It was him." Ethan embraced his family, feeling a strange mixture of awe and gratitude. "I think," he said slowly, "that this is a reminder of where we came from, of what really matters." That night, back at home, the family sat together, more united than ever. They talked about the future, about how to maintain balance between work and family, about the importance of not losing sight of what really mattered in life. As they prepared for bed, Hannah looked out the window towards the distant forest. Silently, she thanked the wolf, life, fate, for this second chance. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with her family by her side and the spirit of the wolf guiding them, they were ready to face any challenge the future might bring. Years passed, and Shadow grew into a beautiful young woman of 16. Her connection with nature and her passion for herbal medicine, inherited from her mother, had strengthened over time. Shadow's Remedies and Repairs had become a prosperous and respected business, known throughout the region for its effective natural remedies and excellent mechanical service. One summer afternoon, as Shadow helped her mother prepare a new batch of tinctures, Hannah noticed something different about her daughter. Her amber eyes, so similar to the wolf's, shone with a determination that reminded her of herself when she was young. "Shadow," Hannah said, "is there something you want to tell me?" Shadow took a deep breath, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Mom," she began, "I've been thinking, I want to study medicine. I want to combine what I've learned from you with modern science. I think I could help a lot of people." Hannah felt a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Her little girl wasn't so little anymore. "It's a difficult path, my love," she said softly. "But if it's what you really want, your father and I will support you all the way." That night, during the family dinner, Shadow shared her plans with Ethan and the family. Although surprised at first, Ethan couldn't help but smile with pride. "My girl," he said, "you're going to be an incredible doctor." However, the news also brought a bittersweet realization. Shadow would have to leave town to study in the city. The idea of separating from their daughter was difficult for Hannah and Ethan, but they knew it was necessary for Shadow to pursue her dreams. The following months were a whirlwind of preparations. Shadow studied tirelessly for the entrance exams, while Hannah and Ethan worked extra hours to save money for their daughter's university education. One night, a few weeks before Shadow was to leave for the city, Hannah found her sitting on the back porch, looking towards the forest. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Hannah asked, sitting next to her daughter. Shadow nodded, but her eyes were full of tears. "I'm excited about going to university, Mom, but I'm also scared. What if I'm not good enough? What if I miss you too much?" Hannah hugged her daughter. "Oh, Shadow," she said softly, "of course you'll miss us and we'll miss you. But you carry the strength of the wolf within you, my girl. You're brave and compassionate, intelligent and determined. I know you'll do wonderful things." As mother and daughter shared this moment, a distant howl echoed from the forest. They both looked at each other, surprised. "Do you think it's—" Shadow began. Hannah smiled. "Maybe. Perhaps it's his way of telling you he'll always be with you, no matter where you go." The day of Shadow's departure came too soon. The family gathered in front of the house, Ethan's car loaded with Shadow's belongings. Everyone's eyes were moist as they hugged. "Remember," Hannah said, holding her daughter's face in her hands, "whenever you need strength, think of the wolf. It's in your heart, in your name, in your eyes." Ethan hugged his daughter tightly. "We're so proud of you, Shadow. Go and conquer the world, but don't forget where you come from." As Shadow got into the car, a movement at the edge of the forest caught her attention. There, barely visible among the trees, was the wolf. Its amber eyes met Shadow's for a brief moment, and then it disappeared into the thicket. Shadow smiled through her tears. It was the sign she needed. She was ready for her new adventure. Months passed, And although they terribly missed Shadow, Hannah and Ethan adapted to their new routine. Phone calls and occasional visits from Shadow filled their days with joy. Their daughter excitedly told them about her classes, her new friends, and how she applied the knowledge of herbs she had learned at home in her medical studies. One day, almost at the end of Shadow's first year at university, Hannah received an unexpected call. It was the dean of the medical school. "Mrs. Johnson," said the dean, "your daughter Shadow has made a remarkable discovery. She has managed to combine one of your traditional remedies with modern medical techniques, creating an innovative treatment for a disease we thought was untreatable." Hannah listened in amazement as the dean explained how Shadow's work was revolutionizing the field of natural medicine. Her heart swelled with pride. That night, Hannah and Ethan celebrated their daughter's success. As they toasted, they couldn't help but think about the long journey they had taken since that day, when a young Hannah had found an injured wolf in the forest. "You know, Ethan," Hannah said, looking towards the forest through the window, "sometimes I think all of this, our family, our business, Shadow's achievements, it all started with that wolf." Ethan nodded, hugging his wife. "It's as if it had been guiding us all this time," he said. "First you, then us, and now Shadow." At that moment, as if responding to their words, a distant howl echoed from the forest. Hannah and Ethan looked at each other, smiling. They didn't need words to express what they felt. They knew that the spirit of the wolf, the same spirit that had inspired Hannah so many years ago, now lived in Shadow, guiding her on her path to help others. As the sun set over the small town, bathing the forest in golden hues, Hannah and Ethan remained silent, grateful for the incredible journey they had embarked on together. And somewhere in the city, Shadow bent over her books, her amber eyes shining with determination, carrying with her the legacy of the wolf and the love of her family. The wolf's howl faded in the distance, but its presence remained, a silent guardian of the family it had touched so many years ago. It was a reminder that compassion, courage, and love could transform lives, create unbreakable bonds, and leave a legacy that would endure for generations. 5 years had passed since Shadow left for university. The small town had changed little, but Shadow's remedies and repairs had become a national reference in natural medicine and precision mechanics. Hannah and Ethan, now in their 50s, had achieved a perfect balance between work and personal life, never forgetting the lessons learned over the years. It was a spring afternoon when they received the news they had been waiting for. Shadow was coming home, not just for a visit, but to stay. She had completed her medical degree with honors and now planned to establish a clinic in town, combining her modern medical knowledge with the herbal wisdom she had inherited from her mother. On the day of Shadow's arrival, the whole town gathered to welcome her. Banners and flowers adorned the streets and the air was filled with anticipation. When Shadow's car appeared on the horizon, a murmur of excitement ran through the crowd. Shadow stepped out of the vehicle, her amber eyes shining with emotion at the sight of her parents. She ran towards them, melting into an embrace that seemed to contain all the years of separation. "Mom, Dad," Shadow whispered, tears in her eyes. "I'm home." That night, after the celebrations had calmed down, the family sat on the back porch of the house, looking towards the forest that had witnessed so many crucial moments in their lives. "You know," Shadow said, her voice soft in the quietness of the night, "in all my years in the city, I never stopped feeling the connection to this place, to you, to the wolf." Hannah smiled, taking her daughter's hand. "The wolf has always been with us, guiding us. And now," Ethan added, "you've brought that guidance to the world of modern medicine. We're so proud of you, Shadow." Shadow told them about her plans for the clinic, how she wanted to combine the best of both worlds to help people. Her eyes shone with the same passion that Hannah had when she was young. As they talked, a movement at the edge of the forest caught their attention. There, bathed in moonlight, was the wolf, but this time it wasn't alone. By its side was a younger wolf, its eyes shining with the same intensity. The family held their breath, marveling at the sight. The older wolf, the same one that had changed their lives so many years ago, inclined its head towards them in a gesture of recognition. Then both it and the young wolf turned and headed into the forest. "It's as if," Shadow began, her voice full of wonder. "As if the circle has been completed," Hannah finished, squeezing her daughter's hand. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Shadow worked tirelessly to establish her clinic, with the unconditional support of her parents and the entire town. Shadow's remedies and repairs expanded to include the new clinic, creating a comprehensive health center that soon became famous throughout the region. A year after her return, on the anniversary of the day Hannah had found the injured wolf, the family decided to take a special walk in the forest. They brought a picnic basket with them, just like in the old days. As they walked along the familiar paths, Hannah couldn't help but remember that day, so many years ago, when a scared but brave girl had decided to help an injured wolf. How much had changed since then, and yet the essence of who they were remained intact. They reached the clearing where it had all begun. Time seemed to have stood still there. The trees, the flowers, even the rocks seemed exactly the same as Hannah remembered them. Shadow knelt down, gently touching the earth. "This is where you found him, right, Mum?" Hannah nodded, memories flooding her mind. "Yes, right here. I was so scared, but I knew I had to help him." Ethan hugged his wife. "And that decision changed our lives forever." As they shared stories and memories, enjoying their picnic, a familiar sound reached their ears. The howl of a wolf, followed by a younger one, echoed through the forest. Shadow stood up, her eyes shining with excitement. "Did you hear that? They're here." As if responding to her call, the two wolves appeared at the edge of the clearing. The older wolf, its fur now flecked with grey, looked at them with those amber eyes they had seen so many times. The younger wolf, vibrant and curious, took a step forward. At that moment, Shadow did something that surprised her parents. Slowly, with smooth movements, she approached the wolves. Hannah held her breath, but something in her heart told her everything would be all right. Shadow stopped a few meters from the wolves, and with great respect bowed her head. To everyone's amazement, both wolves responded by bowing their heads as well. "It's incredible," Ethan whispered, taking Hannah's hand. Hannah, with tears in her eyes, nodded. "It's as if they're passing the legacy to the next generation." The wolves remained there for a moment longer, their eyes fixed on the family. Then, with a final howl that seemed to fill the entire forest, they turned and disappeared among the trees. Shadow returned to her parents, her eyes shining with a mixture of emotion and newly discovered understanding. "Now I understand," she said softly. "Everything you've taught me, everything we've lived through, it's part of something bigger. It's our duty to continue this legacy, to help others, to respect nature." Hannah hugged her daughter, feeling her heart overflow with love and pride. "That's right, my love. And we'll do it together as a family." Ethan joined the embrace, and for a moment the three remained like that, united by love, gratitude, and the promise of a bright future. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in golden and pink hues, the family set out on the path back home. But now they walked with a new understanding, a renewed sense of purpose and connection. The wolf's legacy, which had begun with an act of compassion so many years ago, would continue to live through them. In every remedy prepared with love, in every vehicle repaired with care, in every patient treated with compassion, the spirit of the wolf would be present, reminding them of the importance of kindness, courage, and respect for all life. And so as the shadows lengthened and the first stars appeared in the sky, Hannah, Ethan, and Shadow walked towards the future, guided by the distant howl of the wolves and the promise of new adventures to come. The circle had been completed, but their story, like the forest itself, would continue to grow, change, and inspire for many generations to come.